How are you?
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, I'm going to try and make a phone call to Russia here, so let's see if this works. Where's my... There I am. Hi, Tim.
Hello, how are you doing?
How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Can you hear me okay?
We can very well. Ladies and gentlemen, Tim joining us from Russia, ESA astronaut Tim Peake. Round of applause. So, Tim, can you tell us a little about where you are right now?
Sure, yes. I'm in Star City, which is about an hour outside Moscow. And this is where the Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center is, where all Russian cosmonauts get trained. And it's also where all the international astronauts come. When we fly to the space station, we learn about the Soyuz spacecraft and we learn about the Russian segment of the space station. So
it's an amazing opportunity to have two different astronauts on here. Helen, you've been to space. Tim, you're about to go to space. Can you talk to us a little bit about your stories? Helen, tell us a little bit about how you got into being an astronaut and how you got to space. And then Tim, I'm interested in hearing your story too.
I'm sure my story is totally different from Tim's. For me, going into space was just not an option. Yeah, when I went to, at school, nobody from Britain had been into space, and it just wasn't even on my agenda. And I didn't think about going into space at all. I enjoyed science, I studied chemistry at university, I was keeping my options open, and it was just something I enjoyed doing. I worked in industry, and then one night I was driving my car home from work, listening to the radio, as you do, bored with the radio station, just flicking onto the next station, letting it automatically dial in, and I heard an advert that said, astronaut wanted, no experience necessary. So immediately I was thinking, hey, wow, you know, this was a chance to learn about space, to maybe go into space and feel weightless and do experiments that you just can't do on Earth. But for me, I was really thinking about going to Russia, where Tim is right now, doing my training there and learning to speak Russian and doing some physical exercise as part of my job. Because, you know, once you've left school and you're doing a job, combining learning a language with the science that you want to do in your job and the physical exercise, you just don't do it. Suddenly here was a chance to do all those things together. And actually, I applied to do the training. Going into space was just you know, a possible end goal later on. I really wanted to do the training. So quite different to Tim, I'm sure. Perhaps Tim ought to tell us how he started.
That sounds fascinating. You know, maybe not so different, because I started out like most kids, you know, wanting to go to space and be an astronaut. But when I was a teenager, I took my first flight in a glider as part of the cadet force at school. And from that moment, I never looked back from a point of wanting to fly and this massive passion for aviation. So I joined the Army, became an officer in the Army Air Corps, and I spent 18 fantastic years flying helicopters as an operational pilot and then an instructor pilot. And for the last 5 years of my career, I was a test pilot. And that's when really doors started opening to move into the space sector, because I suddenly found myself at the right age with the right qualifications when the European Space Agency, pretty much as you just described there, they put the advert out on the internet this time, not the radio, and they said astronauts wanted for a few corps, to join the corps of the European astronauts. And so I applied with about 8,500 others and went through the year-long selection process.
So can you explain to the audience, both of you, a little bit about the training process? I'm not sure how much that has changed since you first went up. So Tim, why don't you tell us where you are now, and Helen, then a little bit about your experience.
Sure. Well, our training, it starts right from when we're selected, of course, and we go through about 14 months of basic training. That's all the basic skills. It brings everybody up to the same level in chemistry, biology, physics, but also stuff like computer engineering. You know, we stripped out laptops to the bare components and rebuild them. We learn about basic engineering principles. Obviously, on board the space station, there's no doctor, there's a plumber, there's an IT expert. So you have great support from everybody on the ground. Ultimately, we have to do all those jobs. So basic training takes care of a lot of that. But the real sort of focus training starts 2.5 years from launch. And I'm now in the process. I've got about a year to go until launch. So we're really focusing on the science that we're going to be doing on board the space station, getting there and back safely at Soyuz, and how to manage and operate the International Space Station and all the things that come to visit it as well.
Helen, what about you? It looks like it can be some pretty interesting stuff that you get up to during the training process.
I think mine was very much shorter than Tim's. So yes, I had 18 months, and that was it for all my training. That included learning Russian, which I know you've been doing as well, very well, Tim, haven't you, while you're out there? In fact, I'm still in contact with my Russian teacher, so that's how long this kind of thing goes on for. So you think 23 years from now, maybe you'll still be in contact with your Russian teacher, and you know, it becomes easier after a while. But no, 18 months I had for the whole thing. But you see, I was already mission assigned, if you like, although I didn't know that it would be me. It could be my backup who flew. Two of us were trained for the whole of the 18 months, and one of us would fly and one would be backup. So Tim has done a much more sort of broader basic training for a career astronaut. Mine was just a one flight. It was only ever going to be one, so we knew exactly what was going to happen in that one flight. A very limited amount of experiments. I was only going into space for 8 days, not the 6 months that Tim's going to spend in space. So it was quite different, but I had 3 months language learning. And enough Russian to cope with some of the basic training. So like Tim, we did some stuff like astronavigation. So if there was a problem, we could navigate using the stars instead of the automatic navigation systems. So it's a bit about how to work the systems, it's a bit about how to survive, and it's a lot about how to actually do what you need to do, the experiments, once you're on board. Yes, are much shorter than poor old Tim. How long have you been training already, Tim?
Gosh, coming up for 6 years now, I think. You know, what's really good is that as you know, as you get closer to launch, everything really focuses on the stuff that's really important, and that's the stage I'm into now. So every day at training at the moment is just wonderful. You know, I'm in the simulator with my crewmates Tim Popra and Yuri Gagarin, and we're running through all the emergencies. We're going through rendezvous and docking and re-entries, and then we're being taught about the science that we really will be doing on the space station, and also about repairs. Next year, there's lots of changes to the space station going to be happening, which might require several spacewalks. There's lots of visiting vehicles that need to be grappled with the robotic arm and berthed at the space station. And when people actually say, hey Tim, you realise you're doing this is your job, it really focuses the mind.
You know what, those emergencies are really important as well, because a lot of the training is about what you hope will happen, isn't it? But Tim said about the emergencies, and perhaps if I can just say one thing, we had 3 or 4, what was called, the Russians called neshtatny, so not expected, not hoped for situations. Tim will know exactly what I mean by that. And and one of them was actually during the docking. So we knew what to happen if the docking systems didn't work. We knew how to do a manual docking, but we hoped it wouldn't happen. However, during the launch, one of our antennae seemed to have got damaged when the fairing came away from the spacecraft. That's what we think might have happened. We couldn't rely on the information that the computer was giving us, and so we had to do a manual docking onto the space station. So even though you're going through all your training because you want it to work the way you want it to work, sometimes those emergency training, you know, it really does help. And I'm convinced that because of that emergency training, I've survived. I'm still here today. In fact, it wasn't just me, but the 3 of us who were in Soyuz, just the way that Tim's going to fly to International Space Station, the 3 of us in the same kind of Soyuz spacecraft made our way towards the Mir space station. So Tim, I hope you don't have to go through that on your docking to the ISS, but you know, you never know when it might come in useful.
Thank you, Helen. I hope so too.
Can I ask you, Helen, can you explain a little bit about what you did? You were up there for 8 days. Tim, you're going to be there for quite a bit longer. So can you talk to us a little about what you did when you were up there? And Tim, maybe you can talk to us about what you're going to be doing when you're up in space.
Okay, so I had 2 days on board Soyuz. Tim might like to talk a bit about the pros and cons of being on Soyuz for a long time. Soyuz is a very small spacecraft, enough room for 3 people to sit side by side, and then a smaller area, if you like, above, although what's up and down in space doesn't really matter much, but it's another smaller area which you call your living quarters, really. So it's not very big for 3 people for 2 whole days. But really that was our transport. So we didn't do very much other than survive. The experiments were all going to happen on board the space station. Once I got to the space station, then I was able to get out my experiments. A lot of it was about how I was adapting to space, to the weightlessness of space, how my crewmates had already adapted, because once I got to the space station, there were 2 people on board who had been there for 6 months. I mean, can you imagine being up there for 6 months, seeing nobody else, just your other crewmate? And so, of course, when the 3 of us new guys arrived, it was a big party atmosphere. It was all great fun. But I had to look at them and myself. We were doing agricultural experiments. So we were growing wheat seeds, wheat seedlings, actually, some potatoes, took some potato roots, all sorts of things that you can do that you just can't do on Earth. Protein crystals, growing big protein crystals that I could then bring back to Earth, and then they can be analysed with X-rays, and we design drugs based on those proteins. So a whole load of different things. And I was lucky because I could do a variety, as I'm sure, Tim, you'll be doing a whole range. In fact, in 6 months, you'll be doing more than a few, won't you?
Yeah, I think it's quite a few going up. So yeah, sorry, just to talk about a few of the things that are going to be going on the science side of life. The International Space Station, you've got a number of laboratories up there. It's really a number of modules all bolted together. There's a Japanese laboratory, a European, an American, and a Russian segment. And in there, we can do all sorts of research on things like material science, fluid physics, biology, viruses, for example, as well as, of course, the astronauts ourselves. We're the test beds for a number of different life science experiments. So there'll be ultrasounds, there'll be lots of blood and urine taken, all sorts of things monitored in terms of muscle mass, our density, our eyesight. Spaceflight has an effect on all sorts of different parts of the body. So we're fascinated to learn more about that. And that also has a really good benefit for everybody on Earth, because we're learning about vaccines, things like salmonella, and possibly MRSA, as well as how our immune system works and how we can start to build up our immune system. So that's the kind of science side of it. And then on other more practical elements, I've mentioned a few things about the space station next year. We've got a new commercial module, a guy called Bigelow who's building this expandable space station. So next year we're having one of his prototype modules attached to the space station, which is going to be fascinating to see. And we're also having to move a couple of modules around. We're getting ready to improve the space station a little bit for new spacecraft to come and visit it towards the end of this decade. So I'm going to be involved in those kind of activities as well. Also, keeping fit and healthy is a really important part. When you're up there for 6 months, you need to exercise about 2 hours a day to make sure that you stay in good physical condition for the re-entry back to Earth.
Helen, tell us a little bit about your experience in space, what it was like, what you thought about, and then Tim, I'm interested to see what's the thing that you're looking forward to the most.
Wow. So what it's like is probably the hardest question to answer, because it's a bit like saying, what is your life like, in that it's so varied. For me, the biggest, I suppose, surprise was how easy it is in space. I'm sure, Tim, you'll find it just the same. Weightlessness is it is natural. It feels as though you've been weightless all your life. I forgot what it was like. Right now I'm standing up and I can actually, if I think about it, I can feel the floor beneath my feet. You guys sitting down can actually feel the seat beneath you, if you think about it. You forget what it's like to actually sit down, to stand up, to lie down, and you don't need it. I mean, there are some that, Tim, if you'll have the same thing, but when I was on Mir, we just attached ourselves to go to sleep. We attached our sleeping bag to a wall or the ceiling, whichever was the nearest flat piece of space you could find, climbed into the sleeping bag and zipped it up. A bit over your head stopped us from actually floating out, and that's how we went to sleep. Some of the Americans think that it feels better if they have some pressure behind the backs of their heads. So they put a band around the front to actually give them this pressure, which makes them feel a bit like they're lying down. But, I never needed that. And it just feels natural, and you so quickly get used to feeling weightless. You learn how to, you don't need to put something down on a table, but you just place it in the air. You get on and do whatever else you want to do, and then you just pick it up again. Except sometimes, if it's not a very massy thing, it does end up moving away a bit, because you've got to circulate the air inside the spacecraft. If you don't, you suffocate in your own breath. So that's a sort of, convection. Your hot air rises on Earth. It's not going to rise in space, because that amount of hot air is just the same weight as that amount of cold air. So you don't get convection. So consequently, you need to artificially circulate the air. So if you do leave something fairly, let's say, can't call it light or heavy, but not very massy, and then turn around and do something else, you might find that it's floated off somewhere in this circulation of air. But you get used to it, and it's a beautifully relaxing feeling. It's only when you come back to Earth that it gets all heavy and difficult again.
We're going to open to questions in a minute, so keep in mind something. But so Tim, talk us a little bit about what you're most excited to do while you're in space. What aspect is it?
That's I can't really boil it down to just one aspect. That's really hard, but as Helen mentioned, weightlessness has to be one of them. I've only experienced weightlessness for a very short period of time. I go in the back of the aircraft, nicknamed the Vomit Comet, and you go up for about 3.5 hours and do about 30 parabolas, and on every parabola you get about 30 seconds of weightlessness in the back of the aircraft. So I've got experience, just a hint at what Helen was talking about there with the feeling of weightlessness. So I'm really looking forward to obviously experiencing that for a long duration. Probably the view is going to be, the view of planet Earth is going to be the most incredible thing to witness. And we're very fortunate on the International Space Station to have this huge window for that. And it's actually about 7 window panes that is facing planet Earth, and the astronaut can go there and have coffee and just chill out for 5 minutes and look at the Earth pass by. So that's going to happen at the highlight of being in space.
And that's what we actually like doing most of all, I have to say, at the end of a day when there's a bit of spare time. And actually, Tim, we would all gather around together. So yes, it's nice to look out on your own, but actually it's quite nice to do it as a group together. And we would get round the biggest window we had, much smaller than the one you're going to have. But actually ours was, we were a bit naughty actually. It's a sapphire window, and it was sapphire so that we could take some really good infrared and ultraviolet, particularly ultraviolet images of the Earth. But because it was made of sapphire, nicely polished, you don't want pits coming in by bits of debris from space hitting it, so it's covered by a hatch. But what we would do is, sometimes being a bit naughty in the evening, we would open this hatch when we weren't actually doing an experiment, we weren't actually taking images of the Earth, and then we would gather around this sapphire window and just all together, you know, we can imagine 5 little faces all around this window, and we would just look out and talk about what we could see. Now, the danger of sapphire is that because it does let all the ultraviolet through, it means you get a bit of a suntan. So for me, being very pale, I had to be careful. Sergei, who was my engineer, who'd been there before, actually, but he'd just come back from holiday, and he'd already got a bit of a tan, so he used to strip to the waist and top his tan up in front of the sapphire window. So see if you get some sapphire when you're up there, Tim, keep your tan going.
Now,
it's like a great plan.
We're gonna ask one more question, and then we're gonna bring some of you guys up on stage. So if you want to come up and talk to Tim, then do stick your hand up in a moment. But as you guys probably know, there are a lot of different companies around the world. Richard Branson is the famous one. Elon Musk is another, who are trying to put civilians in space. And there's a likelihood that Virgin Galactic are going to be launching sometime in the next couple of years to do low orbit flights. And it does look, it certainly feels like space is going to get a little bit closer for the people here in this room. So can you guys talk about, it's a very exciting time to be talking about space and the opportunities to go to space for regular people. So does that excite you? Do you think that we're going to see kind of civilian spaceflight in the near future?
You go first, Tim.
Yeah, I'm massively excited by this. I mean, it's not just the commercial elements that you mentioned, which is great, and I think that although at the moment, yes, it's a bit of a sport for the rich, but things start in this manner. You know, cars started like this, and now they're everyday items for most people. Aviation started as something that was just for the rich. And this is the way to go. It's going to open up space and human space flight to a much greater part of the population. And hopefully, who knows, in 10, 20, 50 years' time, space flight will become as routine as jumping on an aircraft is today. So it's very exciting time. It's also very exciting that we see what we're doing in terms of space exploration. With NASA's future Orion spacecraft going into space later this year, which is going to pave the way for going back to asteroids, the moon, and eventually Mars. And Europe is very much involved in that project, providing a service module for that spacecraft. So those kind of things are really exciting as well and great to see.
Yeah, and I agree, actually. I think it's, when you think the different ways of commercialization, so it's about these supply ships, it's about humans going into commercial space flight as well. And I mean, if you like, my mission was commercial, although I didn't pay for myself. It wasn't paid for by government-backed money. So there are all sorts of different ways we can commercialize. And actually, Tim, you probably didn't hear, but just before we joined you today, we had some speakers talking about how they had managed to make their own companies. And, you know, I see that that's going to be the way as well, that there are going to be many more people who will just be able to commercialize for themselves and develop a company because of their own idea. There'll be a niche. We won't just be sending astronauts to do certain experiments, but we'll be doing all sorts of things. And my dream that is to see in my lifetime actually a space factory. You know, I love manufacturing. It's where I started my career after university. And I'd like to see us making materials that you just cannot make on Earth. I mean, imagine being able to create ball bearings of a mixture of, let's say, lead and aluminium. Now you can melt lead and melt aluminium on Earth, mix them together, but as soon as you try and cool them, a lot of the lead sinks to the bottom, the aluminium floats to the top. But if you can make that mixture in space and bring it back, solidify it in space, and then bring it back, you've got a whole host of materials that you could, I'm not just talking about lead and aluminium now, but just imagine that wealth of materials we could create that we could then use back on Earth. So that's where I'd like to see, perhaps if I can't go into space again, certainly the future generations, because I think manufacturing is exciting, and manufacturing new materials is exciting. Doing it in space, well, wow, what an opportunity.
So, can we bring the lights up a little bit? We have a roving mic. Would anyone has anyone got a question? That's the first question in the room. Anyone? We've got one over there. Do you want to come up on stage? Do you want to come? If you stand next to me, Tim should be able to see you.
Hello, Tim.
Hello. Should you stand on this side?
Hello, Tim.
Hi there, I can see you now. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Well, as a naval officer, I want to say that I'm extremely jealous of the fact that the Army have put the senior service into space, okay? The question I want to ask is, what kind of experiment are you really looking forward to achieving up there?
Do you know there's a number of different experiments? I think one of the best ones is on the eyesight. We know that the microgravity is increasing the pressure inside our heads. All the fluid, if you like, in microgravity shifts up towards the head and up to the upper torso. And that pressure is actually causing the back of the eyeballs to become a bit misshapen. And over a period of time, rather than the eyes actually fully recovering, realizing that so much is coming back to Earth and the eyeballs are remaining in a slightly misshapen position, which is causing a small amount of short-sightedness. Now, this isn't really a big problem for the astronauts. We're talking about very minor aspects of sight change. But the things that we're developing to go along with research is really exciting in terms of new methods for measuring intracranial pressure, which have great benefits for everyday ER rooms back in hospitals, and also just learning more about the human body and how it operates. I think they're going to be some of the most fascinating experiments I'm going to be involved in.
Excellent, thank you. Just want to say good luck on your trip. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Who's next? Who's got a question? The front row here. Do you want to come up on stage? Can I grab the roving mic from you?
I'm just thinking, while this next person's arriving on stage, it's a good excuse, isn't it? If you go into space and then you need to wear glasses later on, instead of saying, oh, I'm a bit old, I need to put my glasses on, it's, oh, you know what, I went into space, so I've got to put my glasses on.
Absolutely, yeah.
Hi.
Hi there.
What kind of skills do you need to be an astronaut?
Gosh, well, Helen, what kind of skills do you think? What did you have?
Wow, I think you need to have a logical mind and to understand how things work. So you need to have not just the way of understanding, but also the knowledge of how to fix things at the moment. I think you need to have good team-working skills, because nobody's going to space on their own. Nobody wants to go into space with a boring comrade today, a boring colleague. So you have to have that's kind of just be a nice kind of person. What else, Tim? Good language skills, I'm sure.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. You know, it's so much of it comes down to just personality. And during the selection process, this was really brought home to me, because on the first day of the selection process, we had to do all the boring tests. We had to just sit down and do maths and physics and engineering, get them all down the way, and they're like hard skills. What do you know and what you don't know? But once we passed that, the rest of the year-long selection process was nothing to do with our knowledge. It was to do with our personality. It was, how do you work under pressure? How do you communicate with other people? Can you work in an international environment? And all the kind of things that Helen was saying there. So they're the really interesting things that people focus on when looking at astronauts.
So would you like to go into space?
I'm not sure.
We've got time for one very quick question. You've got a hand that very quickly went up there on the back. Do you want to come up on stage? Thank you very much. There you go. What's your name?
Natasha.
Natasha, do you want to come speak to Tim?
Hi.
Hi there.
when you first go into space and like your body becomes weightless, does it like, do you think that's going to take time, like learning to control yourself, like walking around and?
Yeah, well, that's it. I mean, Helen can talk about her experience for, you know, the 80s, and what I've been hearing from the astronauts who've spent a long time up there is that, as Helen was saying, it becomes so natural that you don't think about it. And our human body, the problem with our body is it's almost too good. It's too good at adapting to weightlessness. And so I mentioned about all this fluid shifting up to your head. What the body does is it gets rid of it just by urination. So after about 2 to 3 months, you've actually reduced the amount of body fluid you have massively. And that means the heart has a really easy time. It doesn't have to pump the blood against gravity, so the heart muscle shrinks, your blood pressure goes down, your muscles get wasted because you just don't need muscles, and then your bones start, you start to lose calcium through your urine as well. So the body is really good at adapting to microgravity. The problem is not living in space. The problem is then coming back to Earth, and it really, you know, it hits you like a ton of bricks if you haven't done something to try and prevent all those things from happening. So that's really what we're fighting against.
So what are you going to do, Tim, to keep fit up there?
We have an exercise machine, which of course it can't use weights in weightlessness, but it uses 2 big vacuum cylinders, and we can, it's just like a multi-gym. We can exercise all of the major muscle groups by using just this weights machine that uses a vacuum. Also, we have a bike machine up there, and we have a treadmill. And to use the treadmill, we have to strap bungees over our shoulders and around our waist, and the bungees actually keep us, they give us the force that keeps us attached to the treadmill. So the bike machine and the treadmill exercise our heart, that keeps the cardiovascular fitness, and the weight machine keeps our muscle mass and our bone density in good condition.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tim Peake and Helen Sharman, everyone. And thank you to everyone who came on stage. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Sorry.